Jordan Chris, episode 2 of the TV show C, Apple exclusive, or Apple TV exclusive, I should say.
Yep.
We just finished wrapping up watching the first or second episode, and well, I mean, there's a lot, honestly. It's like exciting but not exciting at the same time. I don't know how to really like place it in episodes of like storytelling.
Yeah. First episode was definitely more exciting, like fast paced, get the
More
action and stuff. Yeah. And that'll come. But what's interesting, and we were talking a little before we started recording, you had the observation that it's kind of a lot of character building and like setting up for future episodes. And that is actually exactly what the second episode is supposed to do in a series.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like writers call it the second pilot. So you have what happens in the first episode, the pilot, and now it's like the story kind of gets rolling, right? So we know what's happening, we know everything that's going on. The second episode is like, okay, now we're in this new world. We're going to explain to you how they're working in this new kind of situation or setting, and then that's going to lead into the rest of the season. But yeah, so that's what this is doing. So it's really setting up where we're at in C, is how they're home. They couldn't stay there anymore. They had to leave. So they found this new kind of haven, like a safe haven, I guess you can refer to it as. And the leader, protagonist, Baba Voss, and his kids are growing up. I think there's a time jump of like, I think it's like,
so it was
12 years.
Yeah, it was total of 12 years, but then like at one point it's like a 3-year jump kind of in the middle of the episode. So honestly, that's one of the things that I thought they did really well, because I feel like sometimes stories that have like these time jumps, it's like sometimes they'll just be lazy and be like, oh yeah, 12 years. And then they like 12 years later, right then, because they don't know how to keep the story going. Whereas this episode, I thought they made the time elapse way more interesting than you would have normally expected. And then also giving you a little bit more on the backstory with I'm going to just call her the queen or the religious leader, trying to understand her motivations totally caught me off guard in this episode. I was like, wait, hold on. I'm like, you're basically a heretic too. Like, trying not to spoil it too much, but like
right.
Her own selfish desires, I guess, because she, and this may speak badly on religious people, but a lot of these religious people want to feel like a god, and that's basically what she wants to. She wants to be the mother to godly children.
She's like an ideologue with a god complex. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's very much exactly what she is.
Yeah, but honestly, I think, and we'll see as we move on. I don't know how much we're gonna spoil in these, so I'll kind of be mums, I guess. Mm-hmm. But she, to me, is arguably the best written character in the series. Mm-hmm. Just because of how dark her storyline is, and then obviously her arc. You'll find both, because I watched it before, but will be interesting. It goes a place you don't really expect. It's not traditional kind of like royal, like what you'd expect of a tyrannical character, how their projection would go. But I mean, when that happened the first time I watched too, and it's just like, oh, like this woman is just selfish. Like that. She literally doesn't care. She's just selfish, and essentially she's doing everything for
personal gain
or personal gain, obsession, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think obsession, it sounds like obsession and personal gain is probably the two, at least from what we've seen of her character so far. And then I don't know, like the whole like sexual dynamic they show with her is just totally unexpected. I'm like, she's like, I need to pray. I'm like, wait, hold on. This is pray.
I found that, I'm not gonna lie, I found that hilarious. So she's like, all right, let me pray. I was like, that's a cool twist on how she's like, what we traditionally think of praying, and she's like, nah, I'm gonna do this.
I'm gonna get me some.
Yeah, right. Like, hold on. Oh my god, that's so funny.
I know. I was like, wait, for real? I'm like, this is not going where I thought this is gonna go with praying.
Yeah. And she's demented, like she's twisted in the head. You know what I mean? Clearly. But I don't know, something about her, it's so cool. Like that whole exchange she had with I guess it would be her advisor, right?
Yeah,
Right
whoever the
before she
guy
was
that
praying.
gave the cord. I also thought that idea of like note taking would never have thought. Yeah, would never have thought of that in a million years. And I was like, oh my god, that is so clever. Because like you'd get like eventually, I mean, whenever people have lost senses, other senses kind of take over and become better able at detecting differences, like sense of smell or sense of hearing or touch. And I just thought that was such a cool idea, being able to kind of, how do you transmit messages to people? And so you just come up with probably a sophisticated not taking or not method that would be similar probably to us using like Morse code. It would be my guess. You know?
Yeah, Braille too. I think Braille would be somewhat similar.
Braille would be similar, but I'm just not sure how you'd easily implement something like that without more advanced technology.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they're kind of stuck with not metal working and stuff like that. Like they have some of it obviously, but they can make weapons. But I guess we're kind of skipped over the like first quarter of the episode where we're talking.
We did.
Because I mean, this episode actually opens out in an exciting note where Baba is out in the middle of the forest, and all of a sudden a bear, like it scared me when the bear is like off on the camera, like over the shoulder, like, whoa, hold on.
Yeah, dude. I love that scene. I mean, that to me served a couple purposes, but if anything else, or if nothing else, just how much of a badass that dude is. Because I mean, mind you, he's blind, right? And you know, I think he's just kind of walking around, just checking out their new home with his kids, like, you know what I mean, bonding, I guess you can call it.
Patrolling probably too, a little bit. Just
like protecting, overseeing, all that stuff, kind of, you know, blended together nicely. Then he gets attacked by this bear, and you know, obviously, like he's carrying his kid, but he drops him. And he's blind, so he doesn't, like, they're not making sound, and you hear him say, like, please be alive, because he doesn't know. He can't just walk up to him because there's a bear there. But then the bear makes its way to the kids, and he hears it, so he springs to action. And this dude just decides to shank a bear. Like, he just shanks a bear, and I'm like, okay, I wouldn't do that, and I can see. Like, you know what I mean? This dude is just a badass. Like, it was nuts.
I know. Just the level of just, I gotta do something, or this bear might eat my children kind of thing it's such a crazy thing, especially because, you know, in my head, I'm just thinking like, how do you like know where you're even stabbing? Because like you kind of have a vague idea where the bear is at just from sound, but like you could be stabbing at air and you're like, I'm going to put myself in a real bad position.
Right? I mean, that's what I'm saying. You got to have some cojones for that. But I think what's cool, what they do is he kind of, I might be remembering this wrong, but I'm pretty sure he waited till the bear got really close and he had his hand out. And so once he like felt the contact.
Oh, that's not a bad.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what happened. We'd have to see again.
I feel like you're probably right about that. So a little bit of backstory here too, is because I've been doing some of the research behind the scenes to kind of understand how the film was being made. And on the Apple website, you can find they actually consulted for a like with a blind association. I can't remember. I'll have a link in the episode description to it. But they consulted with them so that they were portraying blindness and how people acted realistically. So it's all grounded in reality, basically, or at least in a reality of like what it means to actually be blind. So yes, you're probably what he did probably was how someone who was blind would fight a bear.
Yeah. Dude,
there's a lot of caveats in that statement.
So, geez, that's really dope. I didn't know that. That's really dope though, and it makes sense because a lot of the movements and like even how they speak to each other, they speak really close, like especially when it's like an interrogation in that kind of manner.
I feel like we'll get there.
Which happened in this episode. Yeah, we'll get there. But that's really cool that they did that, and it shows, it speaks through that it's not just someone who's like, I think this is what it's like to be blind, and kind of you know, like those little small holes, you'll see like, oh, how do you see that person coming in? If, you know what I mean? Things like that.
Definitely.
That's awesome.
And then what was that? From there, I guess the biggest reveal is now you know who Jerlamarel is for the first time, even though he's kind of whispered as like this godlike or mythical figure of who can see. And it took me a second to realize, because like, you know, when you think bow and arrow, it killed the bear. I was like, wait. And then I had to like re-remember and like put myself into the world. And I was like, oh, right. Nobody can see. So nobody can shoot something accurately. So no one's going to be doing this unless they can see. And I was like, oh, like there's like all these like checkpoints of my logic that had to like get covered.
And then it just makes sense. You're like, got it. You know what I mean? But it's dope. I mean, that was really cool too. And I mean, the first time you see that, I mean, again, Jerlamarel was talked about, but he's never seen yet. And I actually like the decision to bring him up, to show him, introduce him in the beginning of the second episode. So it's not just someone that's spoken about as this whole season or series. Yeah, it's like, I mean, a lot of shows do that, and it's fine if that's the way you want to do it. But I think it also is like, okay, there's like a tangible person. I know who this is. So when he's brought up, I've met him, so you can kind of relate to that. You know what I mean? It's not just some random person that you have no. I mean, granted, he was only on screen for what, 5 minutes, if that.
Yeah.
But at least you have some sort of attachment. So when he's brought up, you're like, okay, that's who that is. Yes. He saved them. Essentially, he's the one who killed the bear. So there's like a little bit of audience connection there.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really good idea.
Yeah, I thought it was cool. I thought it was even cooler that the way he interacted, because now you got to see a sighted person interacting with a blind person, and kind of him being more careful in understanding how the blind people are going to be way more like have no idea where he's at, like, kind of putting the forearm forward to kind of gauge distance and not really be sure. And just it's just like all these like little subtle details about this show that just add up to being just probably one of the most immersive shows I think I've ever actually watched, because a lot of stuff is just forgettable, whereas like this one, it's like when you really just pay attention to like how characters move or subtle dialogue choices, which we'll probably talk about that toward the end, that kind of give away small things that you normally wouldn't like even think about latching onto in any ways, because it's just offhand. It's like, whatever, it's just throwaway detail.
They seem like throwaway details, right? But those details are what make it so immersive. Like literally, so there's nothing that you look at and like, that didn't make sense. And the second you notice that in any show or movie, whatever, the second you notice something that isn't true to whatever world it is, then you're going to remove yourself from it. There's, everyone knows what suspension of disbelief is. Where you kind of buy into whatever it is you're watching. So like Marvel, you kind of buy in that there's a dude who got bit by a spider who can swing from buildings. Like you just buy it. Like it is what it is, right? And it's dope. But then once you buy into that world, if the writer or director, whoever, starts cheating that and kind of cutting corners and having what's it called? Like God from the machine. I can't think of the Latin phrase for it, but just stuff happen.
Ex machina.
There you go. Yeah, I couldn't remember for some reason, but things like that just happen. It's like it takes you away from it. And you're like,
yeah,
I remember I'm watching a whatever. Yeah. So for this, you see it in everything they're doing, the way they speak, how I don't know if you want to get into this yet, but we can wait a little bit. But even like things that people say, like when someone enters a room or things like that, it's all makes sense, and you don't notice it until something like is obvious that calls to that.
Yeah. So I think the before we get into like the more subtle things, I think we should talk about the interaction with the traitor characters, and then the new character, like I guess subclass of character called Shadows, because I thought this character adds even more to like what it means as like a blind society, right? Because like the idea of gossiping is kind of baked into human, or maybe not even gossiping, it's more like spying, right? Like just information gathering is probably got to be incredibly difficult in a blind society, just because you can't just go and report. But it also adds a different layer to it, because if you have someone who's really good at walking stealthily, then all of a sudden they can be, in quotes, a fly on the wall and collect information with nobody ever knowing they were there. And I was trying to place so hard who the person was that was the shadow, and I think she was one of the hunters from the first episode. What if I'm remembering correctly?
You might be right. She comes up again in pretty big ways.
Okay.
I actually don't remember if she was a hunter or not. I don't think she was.
I don't know, but I feel like her face was familiar for some reason. and I'll have to go double check. But in any case, I thought the idea of making this kind of like pseudo shamanic, like it's like a separate religious type figure of like you call the shadow when you need to collect information, but you don't want people to know about that you're trying to find information. Is really interesting. And then also because they're someone who's part of your tribe, they don't speak, otherwise that would give them away as being this.
Exactly.
Again, another subtle thing, right? All they do is speak in clicks, or they don't even speak at all. They kind of have an item, like she stole the whip from him, which I thought was great.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, expertly written, because I remember when I first posted this, when I first started, I watched one episode. This was months ago, or whatever, and I was like, "The show is dope," and I posted it on Facebook, and someone commented and said, "The shadows are dope," and I didn't get to this episode yet, and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I thought he was talking about like shadows, like, and I was like, "Yeah, the lighting's cool," like, you know what I mean? But that's what I thought he was talking about. And then I saw this, and I'm like, "Oh, they're dope. They're just so like expertly written." It adds to like a really cool lore aspect, because I don't know if you caught this, but all shadow are women too.
She mentioned that the one ant character mentions that, because she said that men are too clumsy, and I was like, I kind of laughed to myself a little, like you're probably right about that.
Right, the idea of this like gracefulness, you know what I mean? Because I mean the way her movements were very graceful, like kind of as the two characters. There are two traders, I forget their names.
I can't remember. I don't know if they mentioned their names too much.
One was Gatherbacks. I don't remember the girl's name.
Yeah. All I know, she was an ant. I don't remember that they mentioned it or not.
Yeah. But either way, when they're kind of walking and talking about they want to get the shadow to get information on Baba Voss and this possible witch in their tribe, and they're speaking, and the shadow's following them the whole time, like walking across a log over them, jumping literally right in front of them, and they can't, they're like explaining how the shadow, what they do as she's doing it, and I'm like, oh, dude, like,
it's so good.
Talk about exposition, like perfectly done. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, oh, she only moves when we move, and as they're moving, she's moving with them. It was really good.
And then every time they like try to find her or like reach for her, she's like, no, you don't. Like throws a stone.
Like, a rock.
Yeah, it's such a cool way to like introduce a character that doesn't speak themselves, but letting the people in the story like build the mythos. And even they're not all entirely correct, but they can speak like they're correct about it or whatever.
Right.
And it just, I don't know, it's just such a cool idea. And just the makeup design for it really just kind of makes it unsettling. And then like when they kind of violate the personal space, because if they're the shadow, they're kind of not really a real entity there. Like they're not a human when they're playing the role of the shadow, so they can kind of break the rules.
Right.
I don't know. It was such a cool thing. And then, how it transitions to the next scene where they're inside of the hut. And so we kind of skipped one detail, but when Baba Voss met Jerlamarel, he gets a key and he tells them, hey, there's this chest in a secret location. Go get this thing. And inside of it, there will be items. And all he alluded to was knowledge, which when we talk about what was inside, it'll become clear. And he said, but the thing is, you can't give it to my children until they're 12. So they cut to that scene, and basically the scene includes the witch they were the shadow supposed to collect information on. And they find out, and the audience can tell what it is, but I think they did a great job of writing this scene for someone who doesn't know what these objects are. They grab in the box are books. And so all three blind people, or the two that grab it, they're like, so what are these things? It smells like tree bark. How is this supposed to help us? Like,
right.
Like, and in my head, I'm just laughing. Like, I have all these books behind me, and I'm just like, oh yeah, like there'd be no way to tell what value these things.
Never seen one, let alone seen one, but felt one, anything. You'd be like, what is this? Like, what is this thing?
Like, it just feels like paper, like it's a tree, and it's with like, you're just like, is it leaves? Right. I don't know what it is.
What is this thing? And then the witch is the one who was like, oh, I know these are I think she said my grandmother's grandmother had
like
books.
A great grandmother or great great grandmother, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, which is cool that it's like, oh, that doesn't, when you say it that way, it doesn't seem like it was that far away.
Yeah, it sounds like it was probably 100 or so years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe 150.
Take, obviously.
Yeah, depending on generations, but I'm assuming like 50 years per generation, roughly.
Right, that's probably safe. It's probably a safe assumption. They're like, oh, this is troublesome because one, you're not supposed to be able to see, right? And so they have this like dilemma, like, well, what do we do? Do we give it to them? Do we not? Like, what do we do? And they ultimately decide they'll wait, like Jerlamarel said initially. That's what they decide. And should we skip ahead when the
yeah, I
Margaret?
think yeah, because we covered the scene after that where they had the with the queen and her situation, and then
true. After
that scene, it kind of jumps back to 3 years in the future as the children are kind of growing up, and they kind of, I guess this is the scene that we alluded to with more subtle details. We can talk about how they chose to make dialogue that seems insignificant, but actually ends up being quite significant when you catch it.
Right. The mother, Baba Voss's wife at the time, she's speaking to the witch, like, I have to show you something. So, the kids are they're in their hut, tent, whatever you want to call it. And she calls over to the witch and she's like, I have this toy. I'm going to give it to them, right? Now I'm going to give you the toy and put it somewhere in the room and watch what they do. Well, and they don't tell them when they're moving the toy, right? And they say to the kids, I forget the kids' names, but they say, go find your toy. There's 2 kids. And they go right to it. Now, obviously that means they can see where you put it, right? Because then she says, when we cover their eyes, they can't do it anymore. That is, to me, like, this is why I'm so impressed with this show. Because like,
and they handed it off too. She said, "Give it to me," and then she goes, "Give it to your auntie." And they don't even say anything. They just turn and say, "Here's."
Yeah, I didn't even catch that.
Yep.
But, I mean, to me, that's what is like when they say "show, don't tell," right? And writing, this is true. A lot of writers or people, critics, whatever, will say, "Oh yeah, no dialogue. You're not supposed to speak. Just show it." I don't know if that's what it meant. I don't know if that was as literal, but if there's a way you can relay information without just straight saying the information, like, "Oh, my kids can see." Okay, cool, great. But when you can show that, not just on screen, but the way that it was kind of not even metaphor, but like the technique that they used to relay that information.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I thought that was expertly done. Like, oh, let's use this toy. Tell them to go get it. What does that mean? And you put it together yourself. Now, just for like an extra confirmation, this is what I love too. When that's happening, Baba Voss walks in the tent. And this is like, it's really quick. It's an aside, like Margaret and the witch are talking. The kids aren't on the screen, but Baba walks in. And before we even see Baba walk in, because it's off screen, we hear the child go, "Baba." One, they know what Baba looks like. No one knows what he looks like. And 2, how do you know when someone enters a room unless they announce themselves? He didn't say anything when he walked in.
Or you have a very specific walking pattern.
Right?
Like maybe you have a limp or something. You're like, "Oh, I know who that is. It's Limping Larry." I know. It was so good. Like I caught it too, because at first I thought they said Papa, which made it even more, either way, it works.
Right.
But either way, I'm like, dude, that's so good. It's just, it's these subtle things that you don't anticipate, especially because it's the world we live in, right? Like when you see someone, you say their name or whatever. Or when you see someone walk through a doorway, you kind of, you just make an offhanded gesture and, either you recognize the person or you don't.
Right.
It's just such a cool way of adding hidden elements that you just take for granted in a story. And it's interesting too, like what you're saying, where it's like the show don't tell aspect of this is, I think it shows, like, because you could just have a scene where there's no dialogue and all of a sudden like the children, like you just have like music playing or something and you just see them interacting in some way that gives it away to the audience. But I think they made it emotional for the characters that it was an important thing for them, meaning the mother and the witch, because the mother she's thinking about their safety, right? Because if they're sighted, they're going to be hunted for the rest of their life. And if they aren't in quotes safe or protected, they are going to die or more likely be killed by something. Because I think the hint at this all of this is that the children are going to have to leave if they are sighted, because it's like they're being called to a greater some greater calling, right? Some call to adventure, right? Into using storytelling terms.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And so that's like the maternal instinct saying, I don't want that life for my kids. Which, I mean, that it's an interesting point, because if you're in that same situation, and me or you don't have kids, obviously, but first, I can imagine if it was my kids, that'd be a hard thing to decide. Like, they can get murdered for this shit. You know what I mean? Like, but it's like, do we want to steal that from them? And ultimately, Margaret, I think I'm saying that right, she's like, we have to hide this from everyone. No one can know because this is dangerous. And then she's like, we're not going to give them the books. Like, they don't need that knowledge because it's too much.
It's too dangerous or too soon, and also she doesn't want to give them up. I mean, to be totally honest, I don't think she.
That's another one.
I think it's kind of like in the same vein as the queen is selfish. I think Margaret ends up choosing the selfish road, because she wants to not only keep her children safe, but also because she doesn't want to lose them. I feel like it's a danger of every parent, where it's like you want to make them safe, but there's a point where you want to keep them too safe, and you stifle their own growth. And I think in that situation, Margaret was in that category.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think you're spot on with that.
And then I think one of the coolest stories in this episode was where they had this kind of like a montage going on, where she's reading the children like a bedtime story or like a bedtime myth. And it's funny because when she was saying it, I didn't catch it at first, where she's kind of talking in this abstracted terms about, 4 different people. One might be ugly, one might be handsome, one might be whatever. And she kind of goes through this whole thing, and then all of a sudden she says, oh, and this person was Vision. And so it's kind of this mythological version of Vision, which is, I just thought it was really well written too. I feel like we just keep talking about how well written this episode is, but it really,
I mean, the dialogue in this entire show is like amazing, and just the way they relay information. But even with that story, it's like an allegory for their civilization where they're in, because the other 4 characters were touch, smell, scent, I think, hearing, and taste. And that Vision comments like, oh, one of you is ugly, one of you is this. And the 4 characters to start explaining, or not explaining, but trying to figure out, well, who's the ugly one, who's the other one? And he's like, well, you can never know, so why do you care? And then like a dick, he leaves. Like, but that's what happens in their life situation. Like, Sight left. So, they're bickering, they're fighting, they're trying to figure out who it is. And ultimately they decide the 4 of us are good enough. We don't need Sight. And the mother's telling this to her kids. It's almost like she's planting a seed and they're saying like, your sight isn't really a gift. We don't need it. You know what I mean? As they're like showing them being raised to act as if they don't have sight. Like the son, he's doing, I don't know what it was, but he has like string in his hands. And he's like making shapes.
Yeah, and I thought it was cool too, because it was like, as she was telling the story, they're doing like a time hopping where she would tell a story and then like a separate scene in the first episode they had a witch hunter, and so the witch hunter was kind of being showed here in different sections as he's coming closer and closer to their new village because he's trying to find them. But you get to see time passing because not only the children are getting older, but also the witch hunter is getting older and the clothing is changing. All these like little subtle details of like showing time passing that I thought was a great way to kind of, instead of just putting a screen where it says, and 12 years later or whatever years later, again, like you just get to feel the world kind of evolving around the characters.
Again, it goes back to the immersion, right? It lets you feel like you were going through that time with them. Obviously, you're not watching this episode for 12 years, but like you get that idea that like, okay, a lot of time is passing. They're learning how to live in this world and be blind. even though they're not, and I assume that's not an easy thing to do when you every day you have to act as if you can't see, but you can. It's like even just saying like, oh, look out. What do you mean? Look,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But no, I mean, this is really good.
So cool. I wonder, I'm curious now, I might have to look this up and see. I'm curious if all those contexts they're wearing for the characters, I wonder if they're actually blind. Or are they just really good at acting?
I'm assuming there might be some, but I mean, obviously Jason Momoa is not.
No, I mean like not the characters themselves. I mean the context make them blind is what I was.
Oh, that's a good point.
Because it's like a practical effect then, instead of just hoping the actor is going to sell it. You actually make them, and then maybe have them work with a blind person or something and coach them and be like, okay, how do we do this?
Yeah.
So I thought that was
that's interesting. There's a film called The Sound of Metal.
Oh yeah, that's a great film. I love that film.
It is really good. I forget the actor's name. I apologize. But in parts, I think he ended up taking them out. But in some parts of the film, he had plugged like noise blockers into his ear.
Oh, okay.
So that he actually couldn't hear. But he said it was so uncomfortable and like I think almost painful. He ended up taking them out. But
oh wow.
Yeah. So I wonder they might have. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, I'll look it up and I'll bring it. If I find it, I'll put it in either the show notes or we'll bring it up in episode 3. And then
cool.
I guess the end of this is, so we said that Magra decides that she's not going to give the books to the children, and the witch thinks that she's making error, so she goes of her own accord on their 12th birthday and says, I'm going to give you the best gift that anyone could ever give you, and that is books and a note from your father. And the son at first kind of rejects it. And he says, what do you mean, my father? Because, they've been raised to think that Baba Voss has been their father this whole time. And like, what? So they kind of reject it at first, or at least half of them reject it. And then afterwards they read the note and have books, and they kind of like, well, no one else can figure this out but us. It kind of, I don't know. It's kind of what it felt like to me. It's like, are we going to run away from our, in quotes, destiny? Especially, I think probably planting the seed with young children is to say, this is your real father, and your real father has the same abilities that you do, so that he can help you understand the world. I think that would be enough to drive almost any child to want to understand, right? Because you're trying to figure your place out in the world, and if there's one other person who can help you understand it that is not your sibling,
it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely. And it's cool. I mean, it ends on a little bit of symbolism that we called out. I didn't notice this the first time, but they look at each other, they like climb up away from everyone, and they're gonna get their reading done. And the sister goes, what are you reading? And the brother shows 1984 by Orwell. I've never read it, don't know much about it. I've heard a lot about it, a little more about it. So I guess if you want to speak to that symbolism there, you probably could do it better than I could.
Yeah, I just thought the parallels, at least with the Orwellian aspect of what 1984 represents, is kind of like the big buzzword is around like authoritarianism, Big Brother, basically controlling narratives or controlling information with people. And that's really what the religious authority is doing in this story, or at least as far as we know they're doing. And they're controlling the narrative and, trying to police sight in a lot of ways. And so I felt like that just the idea of books is an allegory to what what has been lost in this like post-apocalyptic society, and they're trying to regain. It's almost kind of like a Promethean story of like stealing fire and providing it to humanity again. It's now we're stealing sight and providing it to humanity again.
Wow, I love that. Yeah.
And now there's people who want to control that for the rest of, because if you give that back, then people can think for themselves, or, and think of it this way. A book is a way to think. You're injecting the thoughts of another person directly into your brain. So you're thinking those thoughts as if you had those ideas. And prerequisite of that is sight.
Right. Yeah. Damn. But yeah,
books are one of the most powerful tools.
Yeah, definitely are. Especially in a time like that when there are none, or they kind of cease to exist. yeah, it ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger.
Yes. Oh yeah, we forgot to mention this with the traitor.
Like, yeah.
Bring it home.
We can go quickly, but yeah. So earlier, the traitor's like, obviously they want to be. They're working with the bad people, right? So he's like, I'm gonna send messages, and I'll send one, or I think he said 3, whatever number. He's gonna send multiple every day. Infinitum, you know what I mean? Just gonna send them. And they're like, well, the chances of them finding them are so slim. He's like, well, eventually they will. So for 12 years, this man is sending messages in a bottle, essentially.
I think he's using the cord method, but like attaching it to a bottle or something.
Yeah. So it's like kind of message in a bottle, you know what I mean? Just sending it downstream, and he does this every day, however many times. And the episode ends after all these years go by, that some random person in another village picks it up.
Yeah, I was trying to figure it out. I was like, who is that? I'm like, because I as that episode ended, it ended with the children with the books, and I thought it was over. So I kind of was not paying attention. And all of a sudden I hear the jingling of the bottle, and I was like, wait a minute. So I like rewound it to see what I missed. Because at first I thought it was like one of the witch hunter guys had like found it in the river or something randomly. But now I'm more intrigued, because clearly that's a different tribe. And well, now they just put a target on their back by having that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a cliffhanger in the sense of, well, if the witch hunters go there, they're going to have at least a direction to go. Upriver.
They're going to get an answer.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But yeah, I mean, that's essentially episode 2. Again, a little slower pace, especially than episode 1. But it served a particular purpose that I think it nailed. Now it's like, okay, so we got all the explaining we needed to do. It's out of the way. Let's go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I'm excited to see, especially because now it feels like the ramp up, like the children are going to probably head out to do their thing and find their father. And even still, it doesn't mean that Baba Voss and the tribe are out of the woods yet, because not only that, they have their own little traitor doing his things. And people seem to keep questioning like the cliffhanger with Baba Voss, is everyone keeps kind of alluding to his darker past, where he was not as charitable as a person as he currently is, which leads me to believe they're kind of foreshadowing that they're going to push him to become that person again without him wanting to be that person per se.
Yeah. We will see.
Yeah, I know you know.
Again,
so
I was like, I've seen it. I'm not going to say anything, but we'll see.
I'm just more pushing this out there because I'm trying to keep this raw for myself, so that I'm going into it with no preconceptions of where the story goes.
Right. But yeah, I think you'll be pleased.